So welcome back. This is Soho Radio, and it's EMIPM presents the Music Library. That was Superpower from the album Foundations from 1982 by Dick Walter, and we've got Dick in the studio with us. Hi there, Dick.
Hello.
So yeah, I wanted to ask. I mean, that's a fairly epic. What synth,
an entrance!
Yes, synth masterpiece. Do you remember anything about the session?
There were four of us in a studio in Chelsea called Snake Ranch,
right?
Which I think was Richard Harvey's studio, and the synth programming is all by Andy Clark,
right?
Terrific keyboard player, and there was the producer was John Devereaux, and the engineer was Steve Allen. And that track, I remember, the only thing I remember about that was that we joked about it might be used to sell armaments. And one of us was a dedicated pacifist, and the other three were pretty sympathetic to that. So the idea that it was going to be used to sell arms was like, well, it's not a lot we can do, but maybe we should give the royalties to ANC or something.
And I also was just struck by the drumming. I mean, there's a ridiculous number of drum fills. Do you remember thinking, what are you doing?
I think it was Charlie Morgan, but that's, I think, one of the constituent parts of building the excitement is what the drummer was doing, which is completely different from now, where you just get a groove for 2 bars and sit there and do nothing. You know.
Yeah.
Sounded good, actually. I didn't remember most of it, but
it works. It works brilliantly well. I think one of the other things me and Paul noticed about that album is there are A, B, C, D, E, F, G versions of every track and like underscores, and it's actually an incredible album for sampling because you've got kind of the synth lines on their own, drums on their own. It's a real gem to uncover because we hadn't digitized it until I think a year ago, or it wasn't available until a year ago. So I wanted to ask how you first got into writing music for media, because I read on your biography that you actually didn't study music at university. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As Quincy Jones said, there are 2 ways into music, through college or the street, and I did the latter.
Right.
I'm not sure. I think the way I got into library was that very early on, I met Sid Dale, who you mentioned a little earlier. And he asked me to do... I was doing a lot of arranging for the BBC, for the radio band and the radio orchestra, and also for some television shows. And Sid asked me to do some arranging of some of, actually not his tunes, but tunes by other people.
So you were already at the BBC before you got...
Yeah, I was very lucky. I started writing... frighteningly young for the radio band and then the radio orchestra.
And sorry, I've got down here Morecambe and Wise, 2 Ronnies, Tommy Cooper. I mean, those shows you were writing for. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was sitting at the feet of, icons of the business. It was a wonderful learning experience. I mean, people like, well, eventually Ron Hazelhurst, who was much underrated as a musician. And then, I mean, I think you learn from those guys through sort of osmosis.
Yeah.
What they do, just you absorb whatever you can.
Okay, and then so Sid Dale was the one that got you into...
Yeah, I started doing things for him, and then I met a couple of people that I think you guys are about to digitise, Berry and Conroy libraries for Ron Denton, and I did a few things for them. I hesitate to think what they sound like now. Listen to that. That's my mobile. And would you believe
guys?
It's a KPM track. I'll turn it off.
That was all done.
Did you license that, Dick?
Was it one of your own KPM tracks? Well, there we go. That's fine.
A ringtone, especially for this afternoon. That was the garage, probably saying that there's something wrong with the car, but never mind.
So just to clarify, then you didn't study music, and then yet you ended up teaching at the academy on the media course at the Royal Academy for Music.
Yes. I may have told you the story. Very early on in the first year, I had a meeting with all of the students, and quite a small department, so you can get away with saying these things. And I said, before we go any further, we need to get one thing clear, which is that you guys have all got individually more music qualifications than I have, let alone collectively. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, how many of you have got GCSE music, and how many of you have got A-level and A-stars and the rest of it? And their hands shot up, regularly at all of this. And I stopped them and said, well, I've got grade 4 piano, which I got when I was 11, and I haven't done anything since then. So somebody said, well, how'd you get the job? Because I think I was called head of media and applied music. And I said, well, there's a big difference, which is that I can do it and you can't. And I'm here to try and help you guys find out how to do it, which sounds a bit self-important, but it's actually true, because you don't learn how to do that stuff by going to school. You learn how to do it by standing next to people who can and absorbing whatever you can from and getting the experience.
Yeah.
Which now I think is probably very hard, because we all sit at home in our bedroom with a laptop.
Yeah, yeah. So harder than ever to learn off other people.
Certainly to learn anything about that culture of musicians in the studio. I mean, most of that has gone, I think.
Yeah. Next up, I was going to play a track from The Editor's Companion. So this was recorded in 1984. And I actually used to work at a post house in Soho called Jungle Studios. And I was in the engine room, and I used to get on the intercom. They'd go, "Can you get me The Editor's Companion, please?" And they'd shout at me. And then obviously they'd be asked for different tracks. It seemed like one of the main albums every single editor used. This is a sting off it. And I remember when I heard this for the first time, I couldn't believe that there was an actual track that somebody had written, that every time we've all heard this on TV, it's been your track. Let's play it. That's called Shock Horror by Dick Walter, obviously. Has that earned well? Has it been used much?
Well, it's earned an extraordinary amount of money. If you think it's in the realms of 4-second tracks, it's done very well. Compared with tracks that last a minute, no.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been asked. I actually had a call from a journalist, I think, asking me about the sort of provenance of it, and he said, "Were you paying homage to Wagner?" Which is actually a good way of throwing someone like me off the track. Because I thought, well, I really know very little Wagner anyway, and I certainly don't know anything that sounds like that. And he quoted some piece and said, the first 3 chords, maybe you were, paying homage to these opening chords, to which I had to say no, I wasn't, because I've never heard the piece before. But it's a nice idea to think that Wagner lives, Well, actually, he lives anyway, doesn't he? But in our world, maybe. But it's actually caused quite a lot of interest, probably because it's become the sort of standard melodramatic punctuation.
I think it has, and I think actually loads of stings off those albums have become the standard for everyone. And I think the reason was, as I understood it as a kind of transfer engineer working at a post house, is that it was one of the few albums that was recorded completely live, and everything was of exceptional high quality. So if I came back with the wrong Shock Horror, they'd just go, "Not that one."
Yes.
I wanted the Shock Horror.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to play another track from that album. It's actually News Plus. It's a news theme tune, just because I think it's great to hear. They don't make news themes like this anymore. I'm getting straight into another track. So that was News Plus, a sort of 15-second news theme, and then Playground to the Stars was from Background Music 2 from 2001. It's another album I remember being asked for on a weekly basis. I think if there was ever a bit of background music needed for a lift or for a supermarket, again it was because it was recorded live, but it was kind of seen as the go-to background music album. Do you remember? I mean, has those tracks, they still get used? Do they get used a lot of the time?
Those string tracks, yeah. I mean, a sort of glamorous string section, there seems to be a fairly constant demand for that. I don't think you can do that stuff any other way. I mean, I don't think there's a contemporary vocabulary which does that. People walking by the pool, ladies who lunch and drive Mercedes and all that. That doesn't really happen these days in quite the same way. And we associate those atmospheres specifically with that sort of music which we've seen in movies since the 60s, I think, and even before, actually. Nelson Riddle and Hank Mancini and all those writers. So it was immensely enjoyable to do. Yeah,
and I think it's the most typical of that type of track. The whole album is full of tracks that are the most typical of that type of track, which is why they work so well when someone needs a track like that. Next up, I've got a track from the Jazz Anthology album you did on KPM. This was in 2007. This is a track called Walking, and I think there were 2 albums, and they're incredible albums, and they're kind of pastiches of the history of jazz. And after we played, maybe we can find out who was on the album as well. This is Walking. Okay, so that's Walking from Jazz Anthology. It's an incredible album, as we were saying. Who were the players on that album, Dick?
Yeah, that was a wonderful band. The late Derek Watkins on trumpet, probably an underrated jazz player. He was the legendary lead trumpet on innumerable movies and sessions, phenomenally highly respected by everybody in the brass world. He was the trumpet player. The 2 saxophone players was Andy Panay on alto and Mark Lockhart on tenor. The piano was shared between Nicky Isles and Gareth Williams, both of whom are very highly rated in the jazz world. The bass player was the unique Chris Lawrence, who seems to be able to do anything, and the drummer was the wonderful Martin France. It's a fantastic band.
So basically the top names in the country in terms of players, and you were getting them on those library albums.
Yeah, and I mean that isn't a band that exists anywhere else, in the sense that I didn't go, let's get Fred Logg's sextet. It was, I just, by instinct and intuition, chose those players, you know. And the interesting thing is that all of them are fundamentally known as amongst the best jazz players in Europe, really. Except for Derek, who is known for his prowess as a lead trumpet player. And yet, I mean, people have said to me, what's Derek doing on there? But actually, he does everything perfectly. It's just totally professional. And I mean, beautiful trumpet solo on that track. Absolutely gorgeous.
So next up, I thought we could talk through some of the biggest syncs that you've had, biggest music usages, or some of the famous music usages you had, because a few had stuck out. I mean, the Hovis advert isn't necessarily it's a public domain piece that you did an arrangement of, is that right?
The script was beautiful. It was written by Jeff Seymour, who died 2 or 3 years ago, who was a legendary copywriter, and he actually wrote, my memory is that he wrote 3 scripts, of which we did the music for all 3 of them. We did the Dvorak New World for the one going up the hill, the boy on the bike, with the bike on the cobbled streets. We did I Do Like to Be Beside the Seaside, which was just one long zoom for 30 seconds, I think, of a family on a very grey, sort of almost February beach scene, sort of Edwardian family, with this very plaintive I Do Like to Be Beside the Seaside. And we also did a version, I think, of the Eton Boating Song, but the one that made it big in the public's mind was the boy on the bike going up the hill.
Yeah.
And it was recorded originally with Jeff's almost explicit instructions to be very whimsical and personal, And there was a beautiful cornet solo by a cornet player, Tommy somebody, who went to Canada, I think. And then agencies being what agencies are, the people in charge of it changed, and they kept the film the same, but they re-recorded the music with a brass band. And I understand why, because they needed to do something different, I suppose. But I don't think it actually does what Jeff wanted it to do.
Right.
And there we are again. Another. I'm going to turn this off.
You'll get all the payments for it, though. It's the more you can play your own tracks on air.
You sneak.
Yes. Well, there we are. So, off the album, it's actually my partner's ringtone on there as well. But that was another track off Jazz Anthology.
So so I think the Hovis ad was voted the country's favourite advert at that point, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then you went on to do the advert I remember as a kid a lot. Actually, was the Yellow Pages advert, the Gone Fishing advert.
Yes,
which I think as they kept the music, did they really the advert, but always kept the music?
13 years, a few different, slightly different arrangements. That was the dream job.
Yeah.
That was the most enjoyable job ever. And you should ask me why, and I'm not going to wait. I'm going to tell you why it was a dream job, which is that the script was written by David Abbott, who was an iconic gentleman of UK advertising. Beautifully written script. And I had a call, and they said, we're pitching for the Yellow Pages account. We'd like you to do something. I went in for a meeting with David, and he talked through with a storyboard. This is before the days of video animatics and things, just with the pictures on a sheets of paper. And he talked through the script, and he said, I just left it. And I said, what do you want? And he said, oh, something whimsical. Okay. So I wrote the Yellow Pages track and played it to him on a cassette on the piano. And he just said, that's fine, sounds nice, something like that. And we went into the studio and we recorded it. And we recorded
13 years.
We recorded it with a solo piano and maybe a clarinet and piano. And of course, the piano was the one that ticked the box. And that was it. And it was lovely. And I mean, David was such a total professional and knew what he wanted, and he heard it. And that was it. It's the end of it. It's exactly what you want jobs to be like, you know. My thing is, when you do those sort of gigs, there are three things you can get. You can get money, you can get fun, you can get an ego massage, but you never get all three together, except on Yellow Pages.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
So next up, I thought we'd play a track of yours called Hot Licorice from Pure Big Band, which is from 1993. Just before we do that, I mean, it would have been used loads of times, but there's a particular sync that you remember from that one as well, isn't there?
Just by accident, I was watching an episode of X-Files, which was a cult, very successful TV series, very high production values, etc., etc. And there was a story of a ship sinking. I suppose it was a 1930s, 40s ship sinking under the ocean, and the visuals were going between, I don't know what was happening in the contemporary world, but a ballroom underwater and something else, some tense, dramatic scene happening elsewhere, and the visuals were mixing between the two. And they very cleverly mixed Mark Snow's music, which was the contemporary stuff, with Hot Licorice whenever you saw the underwater ballroom. That's my memory of it. And at the time, I remember thinking, this is a really good sort of creative use of library music. It just worked really well. And of course, it's a fabulous program. I mean, X-Files was one of the big successes of that time. So to have one's music in that is it's really nice.
Yeah. Okay, so this is Hot Licorice from Pure Big Band. That was Hot Licorice by Dick Walter from Pure Big Band from 1993. Incredible clarinet playing there. So that's it. Thanks for joining us today, Dick. I think before you go, what are you doing now? What projects are you working on?
Still engrossed in production music. I set up my own company 6 or 7 years ago called Score Production Music. And it's nice that you ask actually this week, because we've just released our 100th album, which is nice, called Celebration. Didn't know we'd get that far. We managed it.
That's pretty. I mean, 100 album.
Yeah,
That's good.
Library is it's no mean feat.
I think people wait, after the first 2 or 3 or 4 to see if you're actually going to be around anymore. So it's gratifying to actually get to 100, which is a credit to, all the writers, lots of writers who've been KPM writers. My peer group, my generation. It's terrific.
And thanks for all the incredible albums you did. I mean, part of the 1,000 series were obviously where you ended, and then the KPM main series.
Pleasure. It's great.
Amazing. So to finish, we're going to play another one of Dick's 6-second stings from the Editor's Companion. This is called Good Night, Folks. After this, I'm going to hand over to Paul, who's, we're going to play a few favourite tracks just to finish the show. Okay, this is Good Night, Folks.